The courtroom fell silent. The only sound was the sharp intake of breath from the audience, the rustling of papers from the stunned lawyers, and the gavel trembling slightly in the judge's grasp. No one had expected it. No one had dared to think it. But the words had already left the teenage boy's mouth. You abandoned us. His voice was steady, but his hands trembled at his sides. His dark brown eyes locked onto the older man in the black robe, sitting high above the courtroom. The judge's face paled, his fingers gripping the wooden bench in front of him. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. The shock spread like wildfire through the room. Jurors exchanged glances. The bailiff, usually emotionless, looked down at the boy with wide eyes. The boy's younger sister sat frozen in her chair, her tiny hands gripping the sleeves of her oversized hoodie. The judge's eyes flickered with something. Regret? Guilt? And then, just as suddenly, the boy took a deep breath and continued. You left us when we needed you the most, he said, his voice shaking now, but not with fear. With anger. With hurt. You weren't there when our mom died. You weren't there when we had to sleep in the car for weeks. You weren't there when my sister cried herself to sleep, hungry. But now you want to sit here and judge us. Gasps filled the room. The courtroom, packed with reporters and strangers, hung on every word. The judge leaned forward slightly, his lips pressing into a thin line. His hands curled into fists, knuckles white. He started, but he was cut off. The boy shook his head. You don't get to speak now. You had your chance. The weight of those words hit the judge like a hammer. And then, the courtroom doors swung open with a loud bang. A tall man in a suit stormed in, his face twisted with urgency. His presence sent a ripple of tension through the room. Something was happening. Something big. The bailiff stepped forward. Sir, you can't just. But before he could finish, the man's eyes locked onto the judge. We have a problem, he said. The judge exhaled sharply, running a hand down his face. He looked back at the teenage boy, his expression unreadable. Then he turned to the man who had just entered. What kind of problem? The man's jaw tightened. He hesitated for just a moment before finally saying, It's about the case. And it changes everything. The story of how they got here began long before this moment. It started on a cold winter night, with a boy and his little sister, alone in the back seat of a broken-down car. Daniel pulled his sister's thin blanket up to her chin and tucked it around her small frame. The car was freezing, and she had been shivering for hours. He clenched his jaw, trying to stop the frustration from rising in his chest. They shouldn't be here. Not like this. But they had nowhere else to go. Danny, his sister's voice was barely a whisper. He looked down. Yeah, Maddie. She turned her head slightly on the seat, her big blue eyes peeking out from under the blanket. Are we going to be okay? Daniel hesitated. He knew she was only 6, but she wasn't dumb. She could tell things were bad, and lying to her felt wrong. But the truth? The truth was too cruel. Yeah, he finally said. We're going to be okay. Maddie nodded and snuggled deeper into the blanket. Within minutes, her breathing slowed, and she was asleep again. Daniel exhaled shakily, rubbing his cold hands together. He was 14, old enough to know that promises didn't always mean anything. People broke them all the time. Their mom had made promises too, that she would always take care of them, that they'd always have a home. But then she got sick. And no matter how many times Daniel prayed, no matter how many nights Maddie wished on stars, their mom didn't get better. She died 6 months ago. And their father? Well, he left long before that. Daniel barely remembered him. Just a shadow in the doorway. A deep voice that used to laugh, but turned cold. And then one day, he was gone. No calls. No visits. No goodbye. It was just him and Maddie now. A gust of icy wind slipped through the cracked window, sending a shiver down Daniel's spine. He pulled his hoodie tighter around himself and curled up beside his sister. Tomorrow. He'd figure something out tomorrow. Morning came too soon, and hunger gnawed at Daniel's stomach. They hadn't eaten since yesterday morning. He had found a couple of old crackers in the glove box, but Maddie had eaten most of them. He didn't mind. He had gotten used to being hungry. Maddie rubbed her eyes sleepily. Danny, my tummy hurts. Daniel reached over and patted her head. I know, Mads. We'll get something to eat soon, okay? She nodded, but her face was pale. Too pale. Daniel clenched his fists. He needed to do something. They had tried shelters, but they were always full. The few times they had managed to get in, the other kids were mean, and the food was barely enough. Maddie had cried the last time they went, scared of the shouting in the hallway. Daniel had promised her they wouldn't go back unless they had no choice. But now, looking at her small, thin frame, he wondered if they had already run out of choices. He swallowed hard and made a decision. He was going to steal something. Not a lot. Just enough for breakfast. A loaf of bread, maybe. Something Maddie could eat. Daniel knew it was wrong. His mother had always told him to be honest, to be kind. But his mother wasn't here. And Maddie was hungry. He stepped out of the car, rubbing his arms against the cold, and started walking toward the nearest gas station. His heart pounded as he stepped inside. The warmth of the store wrapped around him, making him realize just how cold he had been. The smell of hot coffee and fresh pastries filled his nose, making his stomach tighten painfully. He spotted a rack of muffins near the counter. Blueberry, Maddie's favorite. Daniel glanced around. The cashier, a middle-aged woman, was busy helping an older man with his lottery tickets. Another customer was at the back, looking at energy drinks. This was his chance. His fingers twitched at his sides. Just one muffin. He could slip it into his hoodie pocket and be out the door in seconds. He took a deep breath, reached out, and then a heavy hand clamped down on his shoulder. Daniel froze. He turned his head slowly, his stomach dropping. A police officer stood behind him, staring down at him with sharp blue eyes. "What do you think you're doing, kid?" Daniel's heart hammered in his chest. He was caught. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. His legs tensed, ready to run, but the officer's grip on his shoulder was firm. There was no escaping this. The gas station went silent. The cashier looked up from behind the counter, her eyes narrowing. The old man with the lottery tickets turned, his mouth slightly open. I wasn't doing anything," Daniel stammered, his mind racing for a way out. The officer didn't let go. He was a tall man, probably in his 40s, with short, graying hair and a weathered face. His uniform was clean and neatly pressed, and his belt held a radio, a pair of handcuffs, and a holster. "You sure about that?" the officer asked, his voice calm but firm. "Because from where I'm standing, it looked like you were about to steal something." Daniel swallowed hard. His fingers twitched. He could still feel the warmth of the muffin in his hand, even though he had dropped it the second he was caught. He looked up at the officer, trying to hold his gaze. Before he could say another word, a small, sleepy voice cut through the silence. "Danny." Daniel turned to see Maddie standing at the gas station entrance, rubbing her eyes with her tiny fists. She had followed him. His heart sank. The officer's expression shifted slightly as he looked between Daniel and his little sister. "She with you?" Daniel nodded quickly. "Yeah, she's my sister." Maddie took a step closer, looking up at the officer with wide blue eyes. "Danny, what's happening?" The officer didn't answer her. Instead, he studied Daniel carefully. The boy's clothes were too thin for the cold outside. His shoes were worn, and there were dark circles under his eyes. His hands were trembling, whether from the cold or fear, the officer couldn't tell. "You got parents around here?" the officer asked. Daniel's jaw clenched. He hated that question. It was always the same. People would ask, and when he told them the truth, their expressions would change. Some looked sad. Some looked annoyed. Some looked like they just wanted him gone. But lying wouldn't help. "No," he said. "It's just us." A heavy silence filled the space between them. The officer let out a slow breath, loosening his grip on Daniel's shoulder. "Come with me." Daniel's stomach twisted. Are you arresting me?" "No," the officer said. "But we need to talk." Daniel didn't move. He wasn't sure if he could trust this man. He had learned the hard way that not all adults meant well. Some only pretended to care. But then Maddie slipped her tiny hand into his, looking up at him with quiet trust. Daniel exhaled sharply. He had to be strong for her. He nodded. The officer gestured toward the exit. "Come on." Daniel took one last glance at the muffin he had almost stolen before turning and leading Maddie outside. The officer's car was parked near the curb, its red and blue lights off. Daniel hesitated before getting in, but the officer didn't force them. Instead, he leaned against the side of the car and crossed his arms. "My name is Officer Harris," he said. "What's yours?" Daniel stayed quiet for a moment. Then, reluctantly, he answered, "Daniel. And this is Maddie." Officer Harris nodded. "All right, Daniel. Tell me the truth. How long have you two been on your own?" Daniel shifted uncomfortably. "A while." "How long is a while?" Daniel glanced at Maddie, who was now sitting on the curb, playing with the ends of her hoodie sleeves. He didn't want to scare her by talking about how bad things were. "A few months," he admitted. Officer Harris sighed. Where are you staying? Daniel hesitated. If he told the truth, would they take Maddie away from him? He couldn't let that happen. But lying wasn't an option anymore. In our mom's car, he finally said. Officer Harris didn't speak for a moment. His face stayed neutral, but Daniel could see something change in his eyes. Pity. Daniel hated that look. Where's the car? The officer asked. Parked a few blocks from here, Daniel muttered. Officer Harris rubbed the back of his neck. Look, kid, I know you think you're handling this on your own, but you need help. Daniel's fists clenched. We don't need help. We're fine. Sleeping in a car in the middle of winter isn't fine, Officer Harris said firmly. Daniel glared at the ground. He knew that. Of course, he knew that. But what choice did they have? Maddie stood up and tugged on Daniel's sleeve. Danny, I'm hungry. Daniel's heart squeezed. He knew she was. He just didn't know what to do about it. Officer Harris saw the way Daniel's face tightened. The way his shoulders tensed like he was carrying the weight of the world. All right, Harris finally said. Let's get you two something to eat first. Then we'll talk about what happens next. Daniel's eyes narrowed. You're not taking us to some shelter, are you? No, Officer Harris said. Just breakfast. That's all. Daniel didn't trust easily, but at that moment, with Maddie looking up at him expectantly, he realized he didn't have much of a choice. Fine, he muttered. Harris nodded and opened the car door. Get in. Daniel took Maddie's hand, and together, they climbed into the back seat of the police car. As they drove away, Daniel glanced out the window, watching the city blur past. He had no idea that this breakfast would change everything. The diner was warm, the smell of sizzling bacon and fresh coffee filling the air. The moment they stepped inside, Maddie's stomach let out a loud, pitiful growl. Daniel felt his face flush, but Officer Harris didn't say anything. He just led them to a booth near the window. A waitress appeared, holding a notepad and smiling down at them. She was older, with kind eyes and silver hair pulled into a bun. What can I get you folks this morning? Maddie immediately looked up at Daniel, waiting for his cue. She never ordered without his permission. He hesitated, then turned to Officer Harris. We don't have any money, he admitted quietly. I didn't ask if you had money, Harris said, nodding toward the menu. Get whatever you want. My treat. Daniel's stomach clenched. Accepting help had never been easy, but the hunger in Maddie's eyes overpowered his pride. She glanced at him again, and this time, he nodded. Go ahead, Mads. Her face lit up. Pancakes, she said excitedly. With strawberries. And whipped cream. The waitress chuckled. Good choice, sweetie. She turned to Daniel. And you? Daniel hesitated. He wanted to pick something small, something cheap, but his stomach betrayed him. Eggs. And bacon. And maybe some toast. Officer Harris closed his menu. I'll take the same. And bring them both some hot chocolate, too. The waitress smiled and walked away. Daniel sat stiffly, his fingers tapping against his knee. Maddie, on the other hand, was already humming, swinging her legs under the table, happier than she had been in weeks. Harris watched them for a moment before speaking. So, Daniel, tell me the truth. How long have you two really been living in that car? Daniel exhaled. He was tired of lying. Since Mom died, he admitted. She got sick. Real sick. And when she was gone, we had nowhere to go. Officer Harris leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. No other family? Daniel shook his head. Not that would take us in. And your dad? Something bitter rose in Daniel's chest. He let out a dry laugh. What dad? Harris frowned. He left, Daniel muttered. Before Maddie was even born. I don't even remember him. Maddie, still playing with the sleeves of her hoodie, spoke up softly. I don't remember him either. Harris ran a hand down his face. And no one came to check on you after your mom passed? Daniel's jaw tightened. People came, he admitted. Social workers. They put us in a foster home for a little while. But it was bad. The guy there didn't care about us. He just wanted the money. Maddie kept crying every night. So I took her and left. Harris's expression darkened. You ran away? Daniel lifted his chin. I did what I had to do. Before Harris could respond, the waitress returned with their food. Maddie's eyes widened as the plate of pancakes landed in front of her, a mountain of strawberries and whipped cream piled on top. She let out a delighted squeal. Thank you, she beamed. Daniel's plate was set down next, followed by Harris's. The waitress winked at Maddie before walking away. Daniel hesitated for only a second before digging in. He hadn't had a real meal in weeks. The eggs were warm, the bacon crispy, and the toast buttery. He ate fast, barely stopping to breathe. Maddie giggled. Slow down, Danny, or you're gonna explode. Daniel smirked, but didn't slow down. Harris, watching them eat, waited until they had finished most of their food before speaking again. You know, he said casually, sipping his coffee. There's a program that helps kids like you. They can get you into a good home. A safe one. Daniel's grip on his fork tightened. Not happening. Harris sighed. Daniel. No, Daniel snapped. I'm not letting them take Maddie away from me. Maddie looked up at him, suddenly afraid. Danny. Daniel shook his head. We've seen what the system does. It doesn't care about kids like us. It just shuffles us around, separates us, and pretends it's helping. I won't let that happen to Maddie. Harris studied him. You love your sister, don't you? Daniel's eyes flashed. She's all I have. Harris nodded slowly. That's why I'm not calling child services. Daniel froze. What? Harris set his coffee down. I'm not turning you in. But you can't keep living in that car. It's not safe. Daniel's chest tightened. So what are you saying? Harris leaned forward. I know someone. Someone who can help. A lawyer. She takes on cases like yours. She fights to keep siblings together. If there's a way for you and Maddie to stay with each other, she'll find it. Daniel's heart pounded. You're serious? Dead serious. Daniel studied him, looking for any sign of deception. But Harris's face was steady. Honest. He wasn't lying. What's the catch? Daniel asked. No catch, Harris said. Just a chance. Daniel glanced at Maddie. She was watching him, trust written all over her face. She always believed in him, always followed him. Maybe, for once, he needed to follow someone else. Daniel took a deep breath. Okay, he said. We'll meet her. Harris smiled. Good choice, kid. But what Daniel didn't know was that this lawyer would uncover a secret that would change everything. And it would lead him straight to the courtroom, where he would look a judge in the eye and say the words that shocked everyone. The lawyer's office was nothing like Daniel expected. It wasn't cold or intimidating. There were no fancy glass walls or endless shelves of books like in the TV shows. Instead, it was small, warm, and cluttered, papers stacked on desks, coffee cups with lipstick stains, and a big whiteboard filled with scribbled notes. The woman sitting across from him was just as unexpected. She wasn't some old, gray-haired lady with a strict face. She was young, maybe in her 30s, with curly brown hair and sharp green eyes that missed nothing. Her name was Rebecca Carter. So, you're the famous Daniel and Maddie, she said, smiling softly as she leaned forward. Daniel didn't smile back. He wasn't sure he trusted her yet. Maddie, sitting beside him, clung to his sleeve. Are you a real lawyer? She asked curiously. Rebecca grinned. I am. I even have the boring law books to prove it. She tapped a thick book on her desk, making Maddie giggle. Daniel stayed silent, watching her closely. Rebecca leaned back. Officer Harris told me a little about your situation, but I want to hear it from you. No pressure. Just tell me what you're comfortable sharing. Daniel hesitated. Talking to strangers about their life never led to anything good, but he had agreed to this. So he told her. He told her about their mom getting sick, about how he had to be the one to take care of Maddie, about how, when she passed, social workers came, shuffled them into foster care, and how he had seen firsthand how broken the system was, how he had taken Maddie and ran, how they had been living in their car, struggling to find food, trying to stay safe. Rebecca listened without interrupting. No pity, no fake sympathy, just quiet, focused attention. When he finished, she exhaled. You're brave, Daniel. Most kids wouldn't have made it this far on their own. Daniel shrugged. I didn't have a choice. She nodded. But you do now. Daniel frowned. What do you mean? Rebecca tapped her fingers on the desk. I specialize in cases like yours, keeping siblings together. It's not easy. Social services usually wants to separate kids, put them in different homes. But if we can prove that you're capable of taking care of Maddie, there might be a way to fight it. Daniel sat up straighter. Really? There's a catch, she warned. You're only 14. Even if you're mature for your age, the law doesn't see you as an adult. We'll need someone to act as your guardian, someone willing to take you both in. Daniel's stomach dropped. We don't have anyone. Rebecca pursed her lips. We'll find someone. Daniel clenched his fists. That sounded impossible. Maddie suddenly tugged on his sleeve. Danny, ask about Dad. Daniel stiffened. No. Maddie looked up at him, her eyes big and pleading. What if he left, Maddie, Daniel snapped. He doesn't care. The room went silent. Maddie shrank back. Rebecca watched them carefully. Your father, she said slowly. Do you know where he is? Daniel crossed his arms. I don't care where he is. Rebecca hesitated, then turned to her computer. What's his name? Daniel's jaw tightened. He didn't want to say it, but something about Rebecca's calm, steady voice made him answer. Thomas Sullivan. Rebecca typed quickly, scanning the screen. Then she froze. Daniel frowned. What? She turned the monitor toward him. On the screen was a picture of a man in a black robe. A courtroom behind him. A judge. Daniel's blood turned to ice. Rebecca looked at him carefully. Daniel, your father is Judge Thomas Sullivan. The name hit him like a hammer. His father wasn't just anyone. He was the judge. The same judge who would decide his and Maddie's fate. Daniel's fists clenched. 1,000 emotions exploded inside him. Shock, confusion, betrayal, anger. His father had been here all along. In the same city. Living a comfortable life while Daniel and Maddie starved in a car. A sick feeling rose in his throat. He knew, Daniel whispered. His voice trembled with rage. He knew we existed. Rebecca's face was unreadable. It's possible he didn't. He knew. Daniel repeated, his voice louder this time. He knew, and he didn't care. Maddie looked between them, her small face full of confusion. Danny, what does this mean? Daniel stood up suddenly, his chair scraping against the floor. His heart pounded. I need to see him, he said. Rebecca's eyes widened. Daniel, wait. I need to see him, Daniel repeated, his voice shaking. I need to look him in the eye and ask him why he left us. Rebecca hesitated, then nodded. All right. Daniel's breath was heavy. His hands shook. He had spent years believing his father was just a ghost from the past. But now he was real, and Daniel was going to make sure he answered for what he did. The courtroom was bigger than Daniel expected. The high ceilings, the rows of polished wooden benches, the flag standing tall behind the judge's bench. It all felt too official, too important. But Daniel didn't care about any of that. His hands were clenched into fists as he stood just inside the doors, his heart pounding so hard it hurt. Judge Thomas Sullivan sat at the front of the room, wearing a black robe, his expression neutral as he listened to a lawyer speak. He looked exactly like his picture, sharp features, neatly combed hair, and eyes that held authority. His father. Daniel felt sick. He had imagined this moment 1,000 times. In his mind, his father had always been some deadbeat, a man who had disappeared into nothing. He had never imagined this. His father was powerful, respected. He had a whole life. A life without them. Maddie squeezed Daniel's hand. Danny, she whispered. Daniel forced himself to breathe. Rebecca had managed to pull some strings to get them inside. They weren't part of the case being heard right now, but she had arranged for them to speak to the judge afterward. Daniel's jaw tightened. He's not just a judge. He's your father. No, not his father. Just a man. A man who left them to suffer. The case wrapped up. The courtroom started clearing. Rebecca put a hand on Daniel's shoulder. Are you ready? He didn't answer. He just walked forward. Judge Sullivan glanced up from his papers as they approached. His eyes skimmed over Rebecca first, then Maddie. And finally, they landed on Daniel. For a moment, his expression didn't change. Then, something flickered in his face. Confusion, recognition, and then, just as quickly, a mask of professionalism covered it up. Can I help you? Judge Sullivan asked. His voice was calm, controlled. Daniel's heart pounded in his ears. His hands trembled at his sides. And then, before he could stop himself, the words came out. You abandoned us. The words hung in the air like a bomb. The courtroom had emptied, but the people who remained, lawyers, clerks, the bailiff, turned in shock. Judge Sullivan froze. His fingers tightened around the papers in front of him. His lips parted slightly, but no words came out. Daniel's body was shaking now, but he didn't care. He had waited years for this moment. You left us, Daniel said, his voice louder this time. Angrier. You weren't there when Mom got sick. You weren't there when she died. You weren't there when we had to live in a car, wondering if we were going to freeze to death or starve. You. His voice cracked, but he kept going. You weren't there, and you didn't care. The room was dead silent. Judge Sullivan slowly placed his papers down. His face had lost all color. He looked at Daniel as if seeing a ghost. Finally, he spoke. Daniel. Hearing his name from this man's mouth made his stomach turn. Now you say my name? Daniel scoffed bitterly. After all this time? Maddie peeked out from behind Daniel, her voice small. Are you really our dad? Judge Sullivan looked at her. Something in his face cracked. He exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face. Daniel's blood boiled. He doesn't even know what to say. You're supposed to be the one making decisions about kids, Daniel said. His voice was shaking with fury now. You sit up there in your robe and decide who deserves help, who deserves justice. But what about us? What about your own kids? Judge Sullivan finally stood up. His hands rested on the desk in front of him as he leaned forward. Daniel, he said carefully, his voice almost pleading. I didn't know. Daniel let out a bitter laugh. You didn't know? I swear to you. Judge Sullivan's voice was firm, but there was something raw in his eyes. I didn't know your mother passed away. I didn't know you had no one. Daniel's chest tightened. Lies. She must have told you, he snapped. She must have tried to call you. Judge Sullivan hesitated. And in that hesitation, Daniel saw it. The truth. She did, didn't she? Daniel whispered. His voice was deadly quiet now. Judge Sullivan exhaled sharply, looking down at the desk. She reached out. Years ago, Daniel felt like the floor had been ripped out from under him. Maddie's grip on his hand tightened. Danny. Judge Sullivan looked back up at him. I made mistakes. His voice was lower now, almost strained. Terrible mistakes. But I didn't know. I swear to you, I did not know you were alone. Daniel's breathing was heavy. He didn't know what to believe anymore. Why did you leave? He demanded. Judge Sullivan hesitated again. His throat bobbed as he swallowed. That's not a simple answer. Yes, it is. Daniel shouted. You left. You chose to leave. What? Judge Sullivan's face was tight, as if the answer was painful. And then, just as Daniel thought he wouldn't answer, the courtroom doors slammed open. A man in a dark suit rushed inside. His face was twisted with urgency. Judge Sullivan, the man said quickly. We have a problem. The judge's head snapped toward him. What kind of problem? The man's jaw tightened. He hesitated before saying, It's about the case. And it changes everything. Rebecca frowned. What case? The man glanced at her, then at Daniel and Maddie. He hesitated, then sighed. It's about the Sullivan children. Daniel's blood ran cold. Judge Sullivan straightened. What do you mean? The man exhaled sharply. New information just came in. And if it's true, then Daniel and Maddie were never supposed to end up in the foster system at all. Daniel's heart nearly stopped. What? He breathed. Rebecca stood up straighter. Explain. The man pulled out a folder. It looks like someone powerful, interfered with their case after their mother died. Someone made sure they didn't get the help they were supposed to. And now we have proof. A stunned silence filled the courtroom. Daniel's mind raced. His heart pounded so hard he thought it might break. Someone did this to us. Judge Sullivan's expression darkened. His fists clenched on the desk. Who? He demanded. The man hesitated. And then he said a name that changed everything. The name hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Judge Sullivan's entire body stiffened. His hands gripped the edge of the desk so hard his knuckles turned white. Daniel barely heard the rest of the words. His ears were ringing, his mind spinning. Someone did this to us. Someone had made sure that he and Maddie suffered. That they were thrown into the system, abandoned, and left with nothing. Who? Judge Sullivan demanded again, his voice sharper this time. The man in the suit glanced at the others in the room before lowering his voice. It was, he hesitated, then exhaled. Richard Calloway. The name meant nothing to Daniel. But the way Judge Sullivan's face changed told him it meant everything. His father's eyes darkened. His jaw clenched. A storm passed over his face, one Daniel couldn't quite read. Rebecca's face went pale. Richard Calloway? She repeated in disbelief. As in State Attorney Richard Calloway. Daniel's stomach flipped. The man in the suit, who Daniel now realized must be some kind of court official, nodded. That's him. Judge Sullivan exhaled sharply and rubbed his temples. Tell me everything. The man pulled out a file from his briefcase and set it on the judge's desk. Calloway was involved in their case when their mother passed away. He had access to the documents, the reports, the foster placement forms. He paused, and it looks like he altered them. Daniel's breath caught. What? Rebecca grabbed the file and skimmed through it, her face tightening with each passing second. This is unbelievable, she muttered. Calloway redirected the case. Instead of following normal procedure, he made sure they were put into the worst homes possible. He bypassed systems that should have protected them. He knew they had a living parent. She looked up at Judge Sullivan, her eyes sharp. He knew you were alive and capable of taking them in, and he made sure that never happened. Judge Sullivan's fists clenched. Maddie tugged at Daniel's sleeve. Danny, what does that mean? Daniel felt his whole body go cold. It means someone did this on purpose. His voice was barely a whisper. Maddie's lips trembled. But why? Daniel turned back to the man. Why would he do that? He doesn't even know us. The man exhaled. That's the thing. He does. Daniel's heart pounded. What do you mean? The man hesitated before glancing at Judge Sullivan. And suddenly, Daniel knew. It was about him. About their father. Judge Sullivan let out a slow breath, rubbing his forehead as if this conversation was pulling old wounds from the past. Calloway and I have history, he admitted. His voice was heavy. We were rivals in law school. Later, we worked in the same firm. We were always on opposite sides of cases. And then, there was a case years ago. A corruption scandal involving a judge. I exposed it. Calloway was the lawyer trying to cover it up. Rebecca's eyes widened. You ruined his career. Judge Sullivan nodded. He didn't get disbarred, but his reputation took a hit. He lost out on major promotions, lost clients. And he never forgave me. Daniel felt like he was going to be sick. So, because of some stupid fight you had, he destroyed our lives? Judge Sullivan looked pained. It seems that way. Daniel felt his hands tremble. His mind raced through all the nights he spent alone, all the times he had to protect Maddie, all the times he had to steal to keep them alive. All because of one man's grudge. This can't be legal, Rebecca said, flipping through the documents again. If we have proof, we can take him down for this. He manipulated the foster system. He endangered 2 children on purpose. The court official nodded. That's why I came here. We need Judge Sullivan's approval to launch an official inquiry. But I wanted him to see this first. Judge Sullivan looked at the papers in front of him, his expression unreadable. Then, after a long silence, he nodded. Do it. The man nodded and turned to leave, but Daniel wasn't done. He took a step forward, his voice shaking with rage. So that's it. He just gets investigated. Judge Sullivan's gaze met his. For now, Daniel's jaw clenched. That wasn't enough. Not after everything Calloway had done. But before he could say anything else, another voice cut through the room. I want to see them. Everyone turned. A man stood in the doorway. He was tall, dressed in a dark suit, with cold, piercing eyes. Daniel's stomach twisted. Richard Calloway. Maddie immediately stepped closer to Daniel, sensing the tension. Judge Sullivan's entire body went rigid. You have no business here, Calloway. Calloway's lips curled into a smirk. Oh, but I do. You see, I heard some very interesting things about my name being tossed around. Thought I should stop by. His gaze flickered to Daniel, then to Maddie, and something in his eyes shifted. For the first time, there was something real beneath the coldness. Recognition. Regret. Something more. Daniel narrowed his eyes. Why are you looking at us like that? Calloway exhaled sharply, rubbing his jaw. And then he said the words that made Daniel's heart stop. Because, kid, there's something you don't know. Daniel's breath hitched. What? Calloway's expression darkened. You're not just some random case I tampered with. He hesitated. You're my case. Daniel's blood ran cold. What do you mean? Calloway looked directly at Judge Sullivan. And then, the words came out. I'm the reason you were born. Silence. Dead, suffocating silence. Daniel felt like the ground had disappeared beneath him. What? He whispered. Calloway let out a slow breath. I knew your mother. A long time ago. Before any of this. His voice was quiet now. Serious. And there's a reason I made sure you never ended up with Sullivan. Judge Sullivan's face was unreadable, but his hands were gripping the desk so hard Daniel thought the wood might break. Maddie whimpered softly. Danny. Daniel swallowed hard. What are you saying? He asked. Calloway's eyes flickered. And then, with a voice that sent ice through Daniel's veins, he said, I think I'm your father. The world stopped. Daniel forgot how to breathe. Maddie gasped and clung to him, her tiny hands shaking. Judge Sullivan's face turned to stone. Rebecca's eyes widened in shock. And Daniel? His entire world shattered in an instant. Daniel's breath hitched. The words echoed in his head, crashing over him like a tidal wave. I think I'm your father. No, that couldn't be true. Maddie's grip on his arm tightened as she pressed against him, trembling. Danny, what does he mean? Daniel couldn't answer. His brain refused to process it. His chest felt too tight, his vision blurry. Judge Sullivan stood frozen, his face unreadable, but his eyes, burned with something Daniel had never seen before. Rage. You're lying. Judge Sullivan said coldly. His voice was like steel, cutting through the heavy silence. Calloway exhaled slowly, his expression dark. I wish I was. Daniel forced himself to speak, his voice hoarse. No, this doesn't make sense. My mom told me she and he pointed at Sullivan, his hand shaking. They were together. Calloway's gaze softened slightly. She loved him. She wanted to be with him. But, Daniel, he hesitated. I knew your mother before he did. Daniel's stomach twisted. Rebecca, still gripping the file of documents, stepped forward. You expect us to believe that you, of all people, had a relationship with their mother? Her voice was sharp with disbelief. Calloway's lips pressed into a thin line. It was complicated. We were young. It was over before she met Sullivan. Daniel's breath came in short gasps. You're saying my mom was... He swallowed, his throat dry. She was with both of you? Calloway nodded. But she didn't tell either of us. Not at first. He let out a humorless chuckle. She only told him. He gestured towards Sullivan, his voice bitter. Because she wanted to believe he was the father. She wanted to believe in him. Daniel's hands balled into fists. Shut up, he muttered. Calloway sighed. Daniel. Shut up, Daniel shouted, his voice cracking. He couldn't listen to this. He wouldn't. Calloway took a step forward. I'm not saying this to hurt you. I'm saying this because you deserve the truth. Daniel's whole body shook. Truth. He let out a short, bitter laugh. Truth? The truth is you ruined our lives. You made sure we suffered. You knew about us, and you still left us in the system like we were nothing. Calloway's jaw tightened. I didn't know. Daniel's voice was shaking now, fury and betrayal choking him. You knew enough. Silence. Daniel's breath was ragged, his body trembling. Maddie whimpered beside him, gripping his sleeve. Rebecca stepped between them, her voice calm but firm. This isn't the place for this. Calloway let out a slow breath. You're right. He looked directly at Daniel. But I'm not walking away this time. Daniel clenched his fists. You don't get to decide that now. Calloway's expression darkened. Neither do you. Not until we know the truth. Daniel blinked. What? Calloway crossed his arms. A paternity test. Daniel felt like he'd been punched in the gut. Judge Sullivan's voice was ice. You don't have a right to ask for that. Calloway met his gaze, just as cold. I have every right. If there's even a chance I'm their father, I need to know. Daniel's head spun. This couldn't be real. Rebecca looked between them, then turned to Daniel. It's your choice, she said gently. You don't have to do this. Daniel swallowed hard. He looked at Maddie, her wide blue eyes filled with fear and confusion. She needed to know. And deep down, so did he. His hands shook at his sides, but he forced the words out. Fine. Calloway nodded. Judge Sullivan's fists clenched, but he said nothing. Rebecca sighed. I'll arrange it. Silence stretched between them. Tension thick, almost suffocating. Finally, Calloway exhaled. He turned to the door, but before walking out, he looked back at Daniel. I don't expect you to forgive me, he said quietly, but I will make this right. Daniel glared at him. You're 20,000 meals too late. Calloway's face flickered with something. Regret? Guilt? But before he could say anything else, he walked out. The second the door closed, Daniel collapsed onto the bench behind him, his hands gripping his hair. Maddie slid next to him, wrapping her tiny arms around his side. Danny, are we going to be okay? Daniel didn't answer. Because for the first time in his life, he wasn't sure. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and old coffee. The walls were too white, the lights too bright. Daniel sat stiffly in the cold plastic chair, his fingers tapping against his knee, his heart pounding so hard it hurt. A nurse had just taken a blood sample from him, and now he was waiting for Calloway to do the same. Maddie sat beside him, swinging her legs anxiously. How long do tests take? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Rebecca, sitting across from them, sighed. A few days. Daniel exhaled sharply. A few days. A few days of not knowing. A few days of waiting for the answer that could shatter his world completely. And then there was Sullivan. Their father, or maybe not their father, had barely spoken since the courtroom. He stood by the window now, his back turned to them, his hands in his pockets. His shoulders were tense, his entire body rigid. For the first time, Daniel saw something close to fear in the judge's posture. Daniel looked away. He didn't care what Sullivan felt. Not after all this time. The door swung open, and Calloway walked in. He had already given his blood sample. His tie was loosened, and for the first time, he didn't look like a man in control. He looked tired. Daniel hated how much he looked like him. Well, Calloway muttered, running a hand through his graying hair. Now we wait. Daniel clenched his jaw. The room felt suffocating. Too many emotions. Too many questions. And no answers. He pushed himself up from the chair. I need air. Rebecca started to stand, but Daniel shook his head. I'm fine. He glanced at Maddie. Stay here. Maddie bit her lip, but nodded. Daniel walked out, pushing through the double doors of the hospital hallway. The second he was alone, he pressed his hands against his face and took a deep breath. Nothing felt real anymore. His entire life, he had hated Sullivan for leaving them, hated him for abandoning them. And now, there was a chance he wasn't even his father at all. Daniel let out a humorless laugh. What a joke. Daniel. He stiffened. Sullivan stood at the end of the hallway, his face unreadable. Daniel exhaled. What do you want? Sullivan hesitated, then walked toward him. He trailed off, his hands tightening into fists at his sides. I don't know what to say. Daniel scoffed. That's a first. Sullivan closed his eyes briefly. Daniel, listen to me. No matter what this test says. I failed you. I failed both of you. Daniel crossed his arms. Yeah, you did. Sullivan's jaw clenched. I know you have every reason to hate me, but I need you to know something. He hesitated. When your mother told me she was pregnant, I wanted to be there. I tried to be there, but he swallowed. She left. She told me she wanted to raise you on her own. Daniel's breath hitched. No, he said immediately. That's not true. Sullivan's eyes darkened. It is. Daniel shook his head. She needed you. She needed help. Sullivan's face tightened. I didn't know she was sick. Daniel felt his chest tighten. She must have told you. She must have tried. Sullivan exhaled. I didn't find out until it was too late. His voice broke slightly. I swear to you, if I had known. Daniel didn't want to hear this. It didn't change anything. It didn't change the nights he spent in the cold, the times he had to beg for food, the fear of losing Maddie every single day. It was too late. Way too late. Daniel's fist shook. And what if the test says you're not my father? His voice cracked. What then? Do you just walk away? Sullivan flinched. No. Daniel's chest tightened. You don't get to decide that now. Sullivan hesitated, then said softly, neither do you. Daniel turned away. He couldn't do this. Not now. I need to be alone, he muttered, walking down the hall. Sullivan let him go. For the first time in his life, Daniel wasn't sure who he was anymore. The next few days were unbearable. Daniel barely spoke. He barely ate. Maddie tried to stay close to him, but he could tell she was scared. Rebecca checked in constantly, and even Sullivan, who he had been avoiding, sent messages through her. And then, finally, the call came. Rebecca's voice was steady. The results are in. Daniel's entire body went cold. We'll meet at my office, she said. Daniel didn't respond. He just hung up. Maddie looked up at him, her small hands gripping his sleeve. Danny. He forced himself to smile at her. It's time. She nodded, but her little hands trembled. And deep down, so did his. Rebecca's office was silent. Sullivan sat on one side of the room, Calloway on the other. The tension between them was suffocating. Daniel and Maddie sat in the middle, their hands tightly clasped. Rebecca held the envelope in her hands. Are you ready? No one spoke. She took a deep breath and opened it. Her eyes scanned the paper. And then, she looked up. Her voice was careful, gentle. The results are conclusive. Daniel held his breath. Rebecca exhaled. Judge Thomas Sullivan is not Daniel and Maddie's biological father. Silence. Daniel's heart stopped. No. His vision blurred. His stomach dropped. Maddie's tiny fingers squeezed his hand. Danny, she whispered, her voice trembling. Daniel couldn't breathe. All this time. All the anger. All the pain. All the hatred towards Sullivan. And he wasn't even their father. Calloway slowly exhaled. His expression unreadable. Rebecca hesitated. And that means, she glanced at the paper again, then turned to Calloway. Richard Calloway is their biological father. The words hit Daniel like a truck. His breath left his body. His hands shook. And Calloway just sat there, frozen, like he had never expected to hear it out loud. Maddie whimpered softly. Danny. Daniel clenched his fists. His world had just shattered. And now, he had to figure out what to do with the pieces. The words hung in the air like a heavy fog, suffocating and inescapable. Richard Calloway is their biological father. Daniel couldn't move, couldn't breathe. His whole life, he had believed that the man who abandoned him, the man he hated, was Judge Sullivan. Every ounce of anger, every sleepless night, every painful moment he had spent blaming him. It was all wrong. The real culprit, the real coward who had left them, had been in front of him this entire time. And he never even knew. Calloway was silent. His face was unreadable, his body stiff. It was the first time Daniel had ever seen him completely speechless. Maddie was trembling beside him. Danny. Daniel tightened his grip on her hand. He couldn't let her see how much this was breaking him. Rebecca cleared her throat, breaking the silence. This changes things. Calloway blinked, snapping out of his trance. He ran a hand over his face, letting out a slow breath. His voice cracked. He cleared his throat and tried again. I didn't know. Daniel's stomach twisted. You knew enough. Calloway's gaze snapped to his. I swear to you, Daniel. I didn't know. Don't lie to me. Daniel's voice shook with barely contained rage. You knew our mom. You knew she had kids. And you still. He swallowed, his throat dry. You still left us to suffer. Calloway opened his mouth, then closed it again. He looked lost. Good. Daniel wanted him to feel just a fraction of the pain he had felt his entire life. Sullivan was the first to move. He stood up, his hands balled into fists at his sides. When he finally spoke, his voice was ice. You're going to fix this, he said. Calloway turned to him, his jaw tightening. You don't get to tell me what to do. No. Sullivan took a step forward. You ruined these kids' lives. You made sure they were thrown into the worst possible situation. You had the power to help them, and you chose not to. His voice was sharp, cutting through the room like a blade. So now you're going to take responsibility. Calloway's face darkened. And what does that mean? Rebecca sighed. It means that, legally, you're now involved. Whether you like it or not. Daniel's breath hitched. No. He stood up so fast his chair scraped against the floor. I don't want anything from him. His voice was fierce, desperate. I don't want his money. I don't want his help. I don't even want his name. Maddie's grip on his sleeve tightened. Calloway let out a slow breath. Daniel, don't. Daniel's chest was rising and falling fast. His entire body felt hot with rage. You don't get to say my name. Calloway flinched. Rebecca hesitated before speaking. There's another option, she said carefully. Daniel turned to her. You're 14, Daniel. You're too young to take legal guardianship of Maddie, no matter how much you love her. She met his gaze. But there is a way for you two to stay together. A permanent way. Daniel's heart pounded. Adoption. The word hit him like a punch to the gut. No, that wasn't right. He didn't need another family. Maddie was his family. Rebecca saw the panic in his eyes and softened her voice. Not just anyone, Daniel. Someone who can fight for you both. Someone who can make sure you never have to be separated. Daniel shook his head. No, I can take care of us. I always have. Rebecca sighed. But you shouldn't have to. Daniel swallowed hard. His pulse pounded in his ears. So what? You want him to adopt us? He shot a glare at Calloway, his voice sharp with disbelief. Not a chance. Calloway was quiet for a moment. Then, to Daniel's surprise, he spoke. I wouldn't ask that of you. Daniel blinked. What? Calloway exhaled, running a hand through his graying hair. I don't deserve to be your father. His voice was raw, filled with something Daniel didn't want to acknowledge. Regret. I don't deserve the chance to make that decision for you. For the first time, Calloway looked broken, but Daniel didn't care. He refused to feel sympathy for a man who had let them suffer. So what now? Daniel demanded. Rebecca took a breath. You have a choice. She turned to Sullivan. Judge Sullivan can take legal guardianship of you both. He can fight to adopt you. Daniel's breath caught. Maddie's eyes widened. Wait, she turned to Sullivan. You'd want us. Sullivan looked at her, his face softening for the first time. Yes, he said, his voice steady. I would. Maddie looked up at Daniel with wide, hopeful eyes. Daniel couldn't breathe. This was too much. Too much to process. Too much to handle. Sullivan wasn't his father. But he wanted them. And Calloway was his father. But he had never wanted them at all. Daniel's head spun. I need time, he muttered. Rebecca nodded. Of course. Sullivan didn't push. Neither did Calloway. For the first time, Daniel had options. He just didn't know which one to choose. Daniel sat on the cold steps outside Rebecca's office, staring at the cracked pavement below. His mind was a storm. Whipping, twisting, refusing to settle. Maddie sat beside him, her chin resting on her knees. She had been quiet ever since they left the meeting. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the street. Finally, Maddie spoke. "Danny." Her voice was small, hesitant. Daniel didn't look at her. "Yeah." She fidgeted with the frayed hem of her hoodie. "What do we do now?" Daniel clenched his fists. That was the question, wasn't it? For years, his goal had been simple: survive. Protect Maddie. Keep her safe, no matter what. But now, everything was different. He wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. He had a choice. And that terrified him. "I don't know," he admitted. Maddie chewed on her lip. "Judge Sullivan, he wants us, right?" Daniel's stomach twisted. "Yeah." "Do you want him to?" Daniel swallowed hard. Did he? Sullivan wasn't his father. But he was the first adult who actually seemed to care. And then there was Calloway. Daniel's jaw tightened. The man who had caused so much of their suffering. The man who had abandoned them. The man who, despite everything, was still his father. He let out a slow, shaky breath. "I don't know what I want, Mads." Maddie was quiet for a moment. Then, softly, she said, "I just want a home." Daniel's chest ached. She had never asked for much. Even when they had been living in a car, even when she was cold and hungry, she had never once complained. But now she was asking for something he didn't know how to give. He rubbed his hands over his face. "We'll figure it out." Maddie nodded, trusting him. She always trusted him. Daniel just wished he trusted himself. The next morning, Rebecca called. "I scheduled a meeting," she said. "With Judge Sullivan. Just you and him." Daniel frowned. "Why?" "Because you need answers," she said simply. "And I think you should get them." Daniel exhaled. Maybe she was right. He needed clarity. And if nothing else, he needed to know why Sullivan wanted them. Sullivan's house was nothing like Daniel expected. It wasn't a mansion. It wasn't some cold, empty place. It was normal. A small house, a little worn around the edges, but warm. Lived in. There were flowers growing in the yard. A bike leaned against the porch railing. Daniel hesitated before stepping up to the door. Sullivan opened it before he could knock. "Come in," he said. Daniel stepped inside cautiously. The living room was cozy. A bookshelf lined the wall. A blanket was draped over the couch, like someone had fallen asleep there. It felt like a home. Sullivan motioned to the couch. "Sit." Daniel did. Sullivan sat across from him, hands clasped together. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, finally, Sullivan sighed. "I know this is complicated." Daniel scoffed. "That's an understatement." Sullivan's lips twitched slightly, but he didn't argue. "I meant what I said," Sullivan continued. "I want to be your guardian. I want to adopt you both." Daniel's heart pounded. "Why?" Sullivan exhaled. "Because I should have been there a long time ago. I should have fought to find you. And I didn't." He looked Daniel in the eyes. "That was my failure. And I don't want to fail you again." Daniel's throat tightened. "You're not our dad." Sullivan's expression softened. "No, I'm not." Daniel clenched his fists. "Then why do you care?" Sullivan leaned forward. "Because I see you. I see how hard you fight for Maddie. I see how much you've sacrificed. And no child should have to do what you've done." Daniel swallowed hard. "I don't want to replace anyone," Sullivan said. "I don't want to force anything. But if you want a place here, if you want a family," he hesitated, "then this could be your home." Daniel's chest ached. It sounded so simple. So easy. But nothing in his life had ever been easy. "I need time," Daniel muttered. Sullivan nodded. "Take all the time you need." Daniel stood. He needed to think. Sullivan didn't stop him. As Daniel walked out, his heart pounded. For the first time, he had a real choice. And he had no idea what to do with it. Daniel didn't go back to Rebecca's office. He didn't go back to the shelter where he and Maddie had been staying either. Instead, he wandered. The city felt bigger than ever, the streets stretching endlessly, cars rushing past, people moving through their lives like nothing had changed. But for Daniel, everything had changed. Judge Sullivan had offered them a home. A real home. A chance to stop running. But could he take it? Could he really trust a man he had spent his entire life resenting? And worse, what about Calloway? The man who had played God with his life. Who had chosen to let them suffer. Who had claimed he never knew. Daniel clenched his fists. He hated him. And yet, the sickening truth remained. Calloway was his father. Not Sullivan. Not some faceless man he had imagined disappearing years ago. Him. Daniel's stomach churned. What did that even mean? Nothing. It meant nothing, right? He didn't go back until the sun had started setting. Maddie was waiting for him outside Rebecca's office, sitting on the curb with her knees pulled to her chest. The second she saw him, she jumped up and ran to him. Danny. He barely had time to catch her as she threw her arms around him. Where did you go? She mumbled into his hoodie. Daniel hesitated before squeezing her tighter. I just needed air. Maddie pulled back and studied his face. Her blue eyes, so much like their mother's, were filled with worry. Are we going to be okay? She asked. Daniel inhaled sharply. He had been asking himself that same question. We will be, he promised. Even if he didn't know how. Maddie bit her lip. Did you talk to the judge? Daniel nodded. Yeah. Her eyes searched his. And? He swallowed hard. He wants us to live with him. Maddie's lips parted. He does. Yeah. Maddie was quiet for a long moment. Then, softly, she said, Do you want that? Daniel stiffened. I don't know. Maddie nodded slowly. I think I do. Daniel looked at her, his chest tightening. You do? She hesitated, then nodded again. I like him. He's nice. Daniel exhaled. Maddie had always been the one to see the best in people. He had always been the one to see the worst. And maybe, just maybe, that's why she was the one who still had hope. The next day, Rebecca called again. Calloway wants to see you. Daniel's stomach turned. No. Rebecca sighed. Daniel. No, he snapped. I don't care what he has to say. I think you do. Daniel gritted his teeth. He doesn't deserve. You don't have to forgive him, Rebecca said gently. You don't even have to listen. But you do have the right to say what you need to say. Daniel clenched his jaw. Did he want to see him? No. But did he need to? Maybe. Calloway's office was cold. Too clean. Too perfect. Daniel hated it immediately. Calloway stood when he walked in. He looked different. Not put together. Not polished. Just tired. For the first time, Daniel thought he might be looking at the real Richard Calloway. Daniel, he said carefully. Daniel crossed his arms. Talk. Calloway exhaled. I don't expect you to forgive me. Good, Daniel said flatly. Calloway's lips twitched slightly. I deserve that. Daniel didn't respond. Calloway sighed. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. Daniel scoffed. For what? Abandoning us? Ruining our lives? Making sure we suffered? Calloway flinched. I didn't know, he said softly. I swear to you, Daniel. I didn't know. Daniel shook his head. That's not an excuse. Calloway nodded. I know. He hesitated, then swallowed. I can't change the past, but I can try to change now. Daniel's eyes narrowed. And how do you plan to do that? Calloway exhaled. By letting you decide. Daniel frowned. What? Calloway met his gaze. Judge Sullivan wants to adopt you. If that's what you want, I won't fight it. He hesitated. But if you want me to step up, if you want me to be your father, I will. Daniel's breath caught. He hadn't expected that. Not at all. Calloway ran a hand through his hair. I don't deserve that chance. I know that. But if you wanted it, he trailed off. Daniel swallowed hard. Calloway had power. He had money, influence, connections. Sullivan had none of that. But Calloway had never wanted them before. And Sullivan had. Daniel's fists clenched. Why now? Why? After all these years, was he offering to be something he had never been? Daniel's voice was quiet but firm. I don't need your money. Calloway nodded. I don't need your help. Another nod. I just need you to tell me the truth. Calloway exhaled. Okay. Daniel's voice shook. Did you ever think about us? Calloway closed his eyes briefly. Then, when he opened them, they were filled with something Daniel had never seen before. Pain. All the time, Calloway admitted. I just didn't realize who you were. Daniel's stomach twisted. That's not good enough. Calloway nodded. I know. Silence stretched between them. Then, Calloway spoke again. If you want nothing to do with me, I'll respect that. His voice was steady. If you want Sullivan to be your family, I won't stop you. Daniel swallowed hard. And if I don't? Calloway's expression softened. Then I'll be here. Daniel exhaled. He didn't know what to feel. Didn't know what to say. All he knew was that, for the first time in his life, the choice was his. The choice weighed on Daniel's chest like a boulder. For the first time in his life, no one was forcing his hand. No one was making a decision for him. No one was telling him where to go, what to do, or how to survive. It was his choice. And that terrified him. Maddie sat beside him on the park bench, swinging her legs, watching the birds flutter by. She had been quiet since they left Calloway's office. Daniel could feel her waiting. She always trusted him to lead the way. And right now, he had no idea where to go. The wind rustled the trees. The city buzzed around them. Finally, Maddie spoke. What do you want, Danny? Daniel clenched his fists. I don't know. Maddie tilted her head. Do you hate him? Daniel exhaled. I don't know. Maddie nodded like that made sense. Do you want to be his son? Daniel's breath hitched. No. That answer came easily. Calloway wasn't his father. Not in any way that mattered. Not in the way Daniel had needed growing up. Not in the way Maddie still needed now. Maddie kicked at a pebble near her feet. Do you think Judge Sullivan would be a good dad? Daniel hesitated. Sullivan had made mistakes. Big ones. But he had also tried. He had fought for them. He had wanted them. And that mattered more than blood. Daniel swallowed. I think so. Maddie smiled a little. Then that's what I want. Daniel turned to her. You're sure? Maddie nodded. I just want us to be safe, Danny. I just want us to have a home. Daniel exhaled. A home. Something he had never really had. Something he never thought he would get. He glanced up at the sky, took one last deep breath, and made his choice. The courthouse felt different this time. Not as heavy. Not as suffocating. Judge Sullivan stood at the front of the room, his hands resting on the desk, waiting. Daniel and Maddie stood beside Rebecca. And Calloway? He wasn't there. He hadn't tried to fight for custody. Hadn't tried to make things harder. Daniel didn't know if that made him feel better or worse. Sullivan cleared his throat, looking between them. Are you both sure about this? Maddie nodded quickly. Yes. Daniel hesitated. Then, slowly he nodded too. Sullivan exhaled, then turned to the court official. In that case, I'd like to proceed with the adoption. The words hit Daniel harder than he expected. This was real. This was happening. He had spent so many years thinking he would never have a real family again. And yet, here he was. A new chapter. A new beginning. Maddie squeezed his hand. Daniel squeezed back. Maybe, just maybe, they were going to be okay. Months later, on a quiet evening, Daniel sat on the porch of their new home. Their home. Maddie was inside, drawing at the kitchen table. Sullivan, Dad now, he supposed, was fixing something in the garage. And Daniel? He was just sitting. For the first time in forever, he wasn't running. He wasn't fighting to survive. He wasn't wondering where they would sleep or if Maddie would have enough to eat. He was home. His phone buzzed. A message. From Calloway. I know I can't fix the past, but I hope someday you'll let me try. Until then, I'm here. If you ever need anything. Richard. Daniel stared at the words for a long time. He didn't reply. Maybe someday. But not yet. He put the phone away and leaned back against the porch railing, listening to the sounds of home. A warm house. Laughter inside. A place where he and Maddie could just be. For the first time in his life, Daniel Sullivan was safe. And that was enough.